how to buy a house from start to finish. This is a video that we've been looking to make for a while, just to be able to spell out, like in simple terms, from beginning to end, what the process is that's involved with actually purchasing a house today. Whether you're a new first-time buyer, someone who hasn't bought for a long time, hopefully this helps with the process side of things. So, step one, getting organised before you go and even start looking at houses. So there is a temptation for people to decide that they might be thinking about buying a home, first home, new home, get all excited and just go out and start looking at things. Yes, absolutely, you can do that. Maybe there's a bit of a better way to get organised first though. We certainly recommend, if you go out and go and speak with, we recommend dealing with a mortgage broker more so than the bank, because they've got more options and more flexibility that they can deal with. If you go and speak with a mortgage broker, get them to do an assessment, do a pre-approval, so you know what your maximum budget is. Now, keeping in mind, you don't have to go and spend the entire maximum budget that you've got. You know, there is an argument for spending less than what you're able to, so you can make more payments and pay the home down quicker, build equity faster. You know, that's certainly a way to approach it, which, you know, that'd be a whole different video. But go and speak to a broker, get your pre-approval done so you know what your budget is. At that stage, you can then go and start looking at homes. So obviously you want to try and have some parameters that you're working with. Step two, going and actually looking at houses. What we would certainly recommend is, you know, if you don't know exactly where you want to be, you need to try and whittle things down a little bit. Pick 2, maybe 3 suburbs that you think are of interest and go and start looking at those. Go along to, obviously, open homes. If it's difficult for you to get to open homes, go and have a look at private inspections. Obviously, as long as you get to look at the homes, but going wherever possible, physically stand there and see, you know, what the surrounding area is like, what the street is like, just what the general feel of the home is. Once you've decided that you like a home and you think that it could be for you, going to then make an offer is going to be the next step, okay? So making an offer. Now, there's a number of different ways depending on what agent you're dealing with as to how you actually go about that process. We like to make things as easy as we possibly can, where we always give you a QR code or a link to an offer form that you can simply then just click on a digital offer form, fill in your details and go from there. As far as, you know, I guess the big question of how much do you offer? That's ultimately going to be up to you, but certainly what you've got to remember is in the current market, especially, multiple offers is very much a real thing. You know, since, you know, realistically COVID times, you know, in most cases, there's multiple offers on properties. What you want to make sure that you do is that you've got your offer being genuinely considered by a seller. So putting forward an offer, there's always a temptation to come in low and start from there. Remember that a seller can at any stage accept any offer. So if they get multiple offers, you may not get a second opportunity to actually vary yours. If you've sort of got the plan of, oh, I'll come in low and then I can always increase from there, you may not necessarily get that opportunity. So I would always recommend coming in with an offer amount that you're actually prepared to pay for the home. Shows the seller that you're serious, but also, you know, a lot of sellers can actually get to the point where they get offended by people putting in super low offers and almost get to the point where they say to us as the agent, I don't want to deal with that person. So, you know, you can make your own life a little bit difficult if you go about it that way. But put your offer in. Keep in mind that with sellers, it's not just the offer amount. Like, yes, that's always going to be the most important thing, is the amount of the offer, but the terms and conditions are always going to be a factor as well. So the standard conditions, subject to building and pest, subject to finance, settlement time frame, they are the big 3. If you want a building and pest inspection done, and we're certainly not recommending that you do or don't, it's typically in a buyer's best interest to get that inspection done. Getting the time frames around that done as quickly as possible is always beneficial. For the seller, what they're interested in is, from the point where it goes under contract, how long is it until it's unconditional and they know that the deal is definitely done. So some sellers will certainly say, if you've got a couple of offers right around the same offer amount, the one that has the least conditions attached to it, or certainly the one that gets those conditions ticked off and out of the way the fastest, is going to be more attractive to them. So with your building and pest inspection, if you can commit to getting it done in 7 days, is more attractive to a seller than building and pest inspection being done in 14 days. So if you can get it done quicker, that's certainly beneficial. With your finance clause, and this is part of the reason why, where we said if you've been and got a pre-approval, if your pre-approval's in place, and you then go to contract on a property, it should be a reasonably straightforward process to then go back to your lender, give them the contract for them to then just run that final analysis of that particular property stacking up for them as the lender. Typically in today's day and age, 14 days or 21 days is what we see most of the time with finance clauses. 14 days is more attractive than 21. So again, if you can offer the shorter amount of time, that's going to be in your best interest. As far as settlement time frame goes, this can be an area where maybe there's some flexibility for you. Quite often the seller may have already committed to another home. They may have a set time frame for where they want to be onto their next property. This is an area where talk to the agent that's handling the sale and say, what's actually the most attractive settlement time frame for the seller? If you can meet that, that's always going to be more attractive to the seller. So if the seller says, hey, we'd really like 45 days, if it really doesn't make that much difference to you whether it's 30 or 45, go the 45. It's all about having your offer being accepted by the seller. Sure, one way of achieving that is just by offering more money than everyone else has, and typically in most cases that's what it'll take for your offer to be accepted. But remember, if they're close, it can often be the better terms and conditions. Subject to sale. Now, for a lot of people, if you're not a first home buyer and you're second, third, fourth, whatever it might be, you may be in a position where you need to sell your existing home as part of the process of buying this next one. So there's a couple of different ways that you can go about that. One of the options, and we did a different video along the way here, which we can certainly send you a link for that if you're interested, is bridging finance. So there is a solution where you can go back to the lender and organize bridging finance, so as you've got better flexibility, and that can be more attractive to the seller. The other option is proposing a subject to sale. Now, the way that typically works is the contract is written up that the purchase of this home is subject to and conditional upon this home that we've already got over here subsequently selling also. Now, from a contract perspective, I'll give you an example. The way that can maybe be written up, and the way that we would probably do this most frequently, is it might say, for example, this contract is subject to the buyer's home going under contract within 60 days and settling within 90 days. That could be going under contract in 30 days and settling within 60. Again, there's some variation there. One thing I would point out is, again, from a contract perspective, it's easier for everyone involved and better for you as the buyer if you're doing a subject to sale, if you can have it agreed to a longer term to start off with, because you can always bring things forwards. If you start off with a shorter period of time and get to the stage where you need more, you then need to get the seller to agree to an extension. So I would say for you as the buyer, a longer period to start off with is typically more in your favor. Again, it's got to be whereas the seller will agree to that time frame. Now, sunset clause is put in place to protect the seller of the property. What it's in there and what the sunset clause says is, until such time as the buyer's property goes under contract, if someone comes along and makes a more favorable offer to the seller on the home in question, then the seller is able to potentially move on to that offer, but only after giving the buyer who's got the original contract a period of time, typically 3 days, to become unconditional in all regards. So again, what that means is, we're selling this house over here. We put a contract on this one, subject to the sale of this house over here. Until this house is actually under contract, if someone comes along and makes an offer on this house that's more favorable to the seller, that can be more money, better conditions, or a combination of both, they potentially can move on to that offer, but only once they give the buyer, the original buyer, a period of time, typically 3 business days, to become unconditional in all regards. Now, in practice, unless that buyer has really been out and already organised backup bridging finance, it's pretty difficult for that to happen. So as the buyer, you can end up in a position where you've gone out, you've found your dream home, got it under contract, got yours on the market, and all the way through that process, and then have the rug pulled out from underneath you because someone comes along and makes a better offer. So that is something to consider along the way. There's a whole nother other discussion that we would address in a different video as to whether or not, when you have to sell a property, going and putting yours on the market first or going and buying the other home first is the right way to do it, but let's leave that aside for now. But so subject to sale can be part of it. Deposit. So there's always a question around deposit, and on the contract side of things, there can be 2 parts. There can be an initial deposit, which is essentially paid, at the time of signing the contract. We normally do it within like 3 business days that it's due. So there can be an initial deposit, and then there can be a balance of deposit, which is typically paid once the contract is unconditional. Now, how much deposit should you put down on a property? Years ago, there was a mentality with sellers that sort of said, well, if they put down a really big deposit, that means that they are, they're a serious buyer. I don't know whether that's right so much, because I think that anyone who's actually getting to the point where they go to contract on a property is a pretty serious buyer. Really, from my perspective, and this is what I say to all buyers along the way, the deposit amount, what that really shows is what their position in regards to finance is. For example, if you're buying a home and you've got 20% deposit, that means that you're only borrowing 80%. That's far easier to get approved and ticked off by the lender than say, I've only got 5% deposit, therefore I'm borrowing 95%. There's more chance of not getting approved in the 95% situation than in the 80. Does that make sense? So really, the whole notion of how much deposit are you putting in, you can just I'm just going to put down a nominal $1,000 or $5,000, but have the conversation with the agent as to what is the total amount that you've actually got saved up as deposit if you're a first-time buyer, or what potentially your equity position is from the house that you're selling that you're bringing across. Really, what you're trying to assist the agent in being able to do is go to the seller and say, hey, this buyer's in a really good position finance-wise. That's really what the deposit question really is all about. At least that's the way that I look at it. Other agents might say something different. That's the way that I approach it. Seller always wants to know, if I take this contract, is it a solid contract that's going to go through, or is it something that's got a high likelihood of falling over on terms and conditions? So, building and pest inspection. So you're getting a building and pest inspection done. As I said earlier, better off to get that done sooner rather than later. You go in, you get the building and pest inspection done. You will receive a report from the inspector. Now, at that stage, what we would always say to people is, remember that the purpose of the building and pest inspection is to provide you with information that you would otherwise not have had or been able to obtain. Really what it means is building inspection, is there anything structural that's a fundamental problem that you wouldn't have been able to see with your own eyes? Same thing with the pest inspection side of things. It's principally there to pick up termites is the real question. Is there termite damage or activity within the house that you otherwise would not have known about or been able to see? It's not a cosmetic inspection. I know that all building and pest inspectors want to, provide this big long list of here's everything that we can tell you about the property, but it's really not about, hey, there's some squeaky door hinges. You could see that when you did the inspection on the property. So keep that in your mind, that the building and pest inspection is about the unseen or the unknown things for you as the buyer. But if the report comes back and there's something in the report that you're not happy with, whether it be something minor or something major, what are your options from there? Realistically, you can approach it in really 3 different ways. One, you can just flat out say, no, I'm not happy with the building and pest report, and therefore I am terminating the contract on that basis with the provision that's given to me under the building and pest clause. So you can just terminate and walk away if that's what you choose to do. Number 2 is if there's some things in there, you can say, we want to request that the seller of the property rectify those things or remedy those things prior to settlement, and that can be agreed. That scenario can be complicated because the reason why is there's always going to be a level of to what standard. Let's say, for example, let's just pick something really, really simple that shouldn't come up in a building and pest, but let's just say the paintwork, right? We want to request that the house be repainted, for example. Well, to what standard? 1 coat of paint, 2 coats of paint? It's open to interpretation, which can make things more complicated. The other option is that for you as the buyer is you can say, we are prepared to accept this building and pest report on the basis that we adjust the purchase price by X amount of money, and then we will take care of those outstanding items. For me as an agent, I would recommend to both buyers and sellers that is the best option if there's something in the report that's not favourable. For you as the buyer, negotiate an adjustment and you then go get whatever the repairs or fixes are done to whatever standard you want to get things done to. Different buyers will have different standards that they want to see things remedied to. So that's always going to be the best way. And we're always going to say to a seller, it's a far simpler option if you're prepared to do it. If the seller's in a situation where they've got to go and spend the money and go organise the people to get that done, and it's going to cost them X amount of money, if they can simply reduce or adjust the purchase price by that same X amount of money, that's far simpler for the seller. We recommend that as the best solution. So you've got that. On the finance side of things, once you've gone under contract, you will send a copy of the contract to a solicitor. I'll come back to that in a second. But you'll also then need to send a copy of the contract to your lender, to your mortgage broker, for him to send through to the lender for them to do their assessment. Sometimes they will simply jump online and do what we call a desktop valuation, where they jump online to, say, RP Data, whatever it be, and assess what they believe the value of the property is, compare that against what the actual contract price is. In certain situations, they'll say, yes, we're happy with that. In other situations, they'll say, no, we want to do a physical inspection, bank valuation. The bank will organise typically an actual certified, accredited valuer to go out and look at the property, go back to the bank and say, we believe that the property is worth this amount. Bank is then happy and says, yes, okay, we're good with that, tick it all off and move on. Coming back to the solicitor side of things. So once you go under contract, the first thing that you want to then do is have nominated a solicitor to handle the purchase for you. So we work with some great solicitors. If you want a recommendation, we're absolutely happy to give you one. You may have a solicitor that you want to deal with yourself. Entirely up to you. One thing I would say to you though with solicitors, and this is just my experience, some solicitors have an approach of they're there to get the deal done and assist with everything running smoothly. Other solicitors can just have a tendency to almost create problems where problems don't exist. That's just a reality. Some solicitors will want to make the whole process more difficult than others. Just bear that in mind. Certainly ask for recommendations if you've got family members or friends that have used a solicitor previously and had a good experience with them, by all means, or if you want, we can certainly give you a recommendation as well. So moving on at that stage. So we've got the contract is, let's just say, a typical contract subject to building and pest inspection. You go and get that building and pest inspection done. You get the report back. You agree that you're happy with that, or, any backwards and forwards and negotiations. Once that's all agreed upon, we refer to that as that condition then being ticked off. In the contract, it's subject to building and pest inspection. Once you agree that you're accepting that, or you agree on whatever terms or variations, the solicitors will then send out communication to say the buyer has essentially accepted the building and pest clause. That's ticked off. With the finance side of things, again, get to the point where done the contract, send the contract off to your broker or your bank, whoever it might be. That goes off to the lender, and they tick that off. That's then finalized. So once the finance condition is ticked off, we then, if it's just subject to those things, that's where we then talk about that being conditional. The contract has moved from a point where it's subject to these conditions to they've all now been met. Therefore, it is unconditional. That's when we effectively consider the property to be sold. Certainly for us, and this is the way that almost all agents do it, when do we put the actual sold sticker or the sold sign up? Once it goes unconditional. Right. Once you get to that stage, it's typically then just a case of how many days have we negotiated until settlement. For example, let's say that you did a contract that had 14 days, 7 days for your building and pest, got that done in 7 days, 14 days for your finance, you've got that done, and 30 days settlement. So you've got 14 or 16 days to go from your 14-day finance to your settlement period. Through that time, that's when the seller is going to effectively be organising moving out, etc., 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 working on the assumption this is an owner-occupier type purchase and the person in the home, the seller, is moving out and you as the buyer is moving in. For the sake of simplicity, let's stick with that. The last step that you've got of I guess as far as what are your rights through the process is a pre-settlement inspection. So ultimately there's an inspection that you get to do prior to settlement, and the purpose of that is really for you as the buyer to be able to go back in and look at the house and say, yes, the house is still in the same state condition as when I put the offer forward. For example, its intended purpose is through the process of the seller moving out of the home, did they trash the house? Did they, I don't know, drop the fridge as they were moving it out and it's smashed a giant hole in a wall? That's what it's there for you to see. It's not an opportunity for you to go back and go, oh, I didn't see this and this and this with the house the first time through. Anything in regards to that you're not happy with the home has to be dealt with through the building and pest inspection side of things. The pre-settlement inspection is just to assess and determine, is the house still in the same condition as when you saw the house and went to contract on it. You then get to the point where coming up for the settlement, this is the exciting part, settlement day, getting ready to get the keys and go move into the property. So every agent's gonna do things differently. We always want to try and make the buyer's life as easy as possible. Sometimes we'll be able to arrange to meet you at the property. Other times, depending on what we've got going on, we may organise for you to come and meet us at the office. It just depends. Talk to your agent at the time. But on the day of settlement for us here in Queensland, and certainly with the solicitors that we deal with, typically settlement happens, they'll give you a time on the day. In a lot of cases, that's 2 o'clock. That does not necessarily mean that it automatically absolutely happens at 2 o'clock. It's like from 2 o'clock. In most cases, it happens pretty close to that time. Sometimes there could be a complication, some small issue that delays the thing. We normally say to people, allow a couple of hour windows. So if, for example, you've moved out of one home and planning on moving into the house on the day of settlement, we understand you're excited. We understand that you've bought this home and you want to move into it. Please understand, though, that for us as the agents, we legally can't actually release the keys until we get a notification from both sides, from both solicitors, the solicitor for the buyer and the seller, that settlement has happened. At that point, we can hand over the keys and you'll knock yourself out. Go for it, go move into the property. So depending on what your circumstances are, yes, you can, coming back to the idea of subject to sales, we certainly do see situations where in a subject to sale, the whole thing is done with what's called a contemporaneous or simultaneous settlement, which means that both settlements happen at exactly the same time. In that situation, for you as the buyer, if you're selling this house, you need to be all packed up and out of that house prior to settlement time. Let's say that's the 2 o'clock and that both settlements are happening at the same time. Yes, you can be in a position where you've got a removalist and they've come in the morning and they've loaded all of your stuff up and they're literally sitting on the side of the road somewhere for ideally a short period of time, but for a period of time waiting for settlement to go through before we can give you the keys to go to your new property. That's about it. That's the process that I wanted to cover for today. Again, just to give people an idea, if you haven't bought recently or you've never bought before, what's the actual processes involved with buying a home, certainly here in Queensland. I can tell you in other states, from the legal side of things, dealing with contracts, it's completely different. But certainly for us here in Queensland, this is the way that it works. So if you've got any further questions, give us a call. My name's Josh Smith. I sell homes here in Logan City and surrounds Southeast Queensland with All Properties Group. If we can help you any further, give us a yell. But that's the process of buying a home here in Queensland. See ya.